I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda standing at my propane tank with a wrench in her hand. My name is Blake Garrison, and I have been living in the Meadowbrook Estates development in Naperville, Illinois, for the past 3 years. The subdivision is one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks nearly identical, with the same beige siding and the same manicured lawns. When I moved in, I thought it would be peaceful. I was wrong. The homeowners association here is run by a woman named Brenda Whitmore, and she has made it her personal mission to control every single aspect of life in this neighborhood. It was a freezing January morning when I looked out my kitchen window and saw her there. The temperature had dropped to -5 degrees overnight, and a brutal cold snap had settled over the Chicago suburbs. I was making coffee, still in my pajamas, when I noticed movement near the side of my house. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal, but then I saw the bright purple parka that Brenda always wore. She was crouched next to my propane tank, fiddling with something. I set down my coffee mug and headed for the door, not even bothering to put on shoes. The cold hit me like a punch to the face as I stepped outside, my bare feet immediately regretting the decision to skip footwear. "Brenda, what are you doing?" I called out as I approached. She looked up, not even having the decency to look guilty. Her face was red from the cold, and her blonde hair was pulled back in that signature tight ponytail that seemed to give her a permanent look of disapproval. "Oh, Blake, good morning. I was just checking to see if I could borrow some of your propane." I stared at her in disbelief. "Borrow my propane?" "Yes, my heater ran out last night and the propane company cannot get to me until tomorrow afternoon." She said this as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. "I am freezing in my house, and since you have this large tank here, I figured you could spare some for a neighbor in need." My propane tank was a 500-gallon tank that I had installed when I bought the house. I used it for my heating system, my hot water heater, and my backup generator. It was not exactly cheap to fill, and I had just paid nearly $2,000 to top it off in November. "Brenda, I cannot just give you propane from my tank," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That is not how this works. You need to call your propane company or get a space heater or something." Her eyes narrowed. "I am the president of the HOA, Blake. I think you can make an exception for me. Besides, it is not like you need all of this propane. Your tank is probably full." "That is not the point," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "This is my property. You cannot just help yourself to my utilities." She stood up, and I could see she was holding a wrench. "I was just going to take a little bit. You would not even notice." "Were you trying to open my tank valve?" I asked, the realization hitting me. "Brenda, that is illegal. You cannot tamper with someone else's propane system." She crossed her arms defensively. "I am not tampering with anything. I am simply trying to survive in this freezing weather. If you were a decent neighbor, you would help me out." I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. "Brenda, go home. Call your propane company again or go to a hotel if you are that cold. But you are not taking my propane." For a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then her face twisted into that expression I had seen so many times before, the one that said she was about to make my life difficult. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "But you are going to regret this, Blake. I will make sure of it." She stormed off toward her house, which was 3 doors down from mine. I watched her go, then looked down at my propane tank. Sure enough, she had been trying to loosen the valve. I could see fresh scratches on the metal where the wrench had slipped. I went back inside, my feet numb from standing on the frozen ground. As I warmed up with my coffee, I realized I needed to do something to protect my tank. Brenda was not the type to give up easily, and I had no doubt she would try again. Later that afternoon, I drove to the hardware store in downtown Naperville and bought a heavy-duty lock for my propane tank. It was specifically designed for this purpose, with a metal cage that fit over the valve and a padlock that would prevent anyone from accessing it without the key. When I got home, I installed it immediately, making sure it was secure. I felt better knowing that Brenda could not just walk up and help herself to my propane. But I should have known that would not be the end of it. The next morning, I was woken up by loud pounding on my front door. I looked at my phone and saw it was barely 7 in the morning. Groaning, I pulled on a sweatshirt and headed downstairs. Through the peephole, I could see Brenda standing on my porch, and she did not look happy. I opened the door. "Brenda, what do you want?" "You locked your propane tank," she said accusingly, as if I had committed some terrible crime. "Yes, I did, after I caught you trying to steal from it yesterday." "I was not stealing," she snapped. "I was borrowing. There is a difference." "Not legally, there is not," I said. "And either way, it is my property, and I have every right to secure it." She pulled out a piece of paper from her purse and waved it in my face. According to the HOA bylaws, all utility installations on property within Meadowbrook Estates must be accessible for inspection and maintenance. By locking your propane tank, you are in violation of Section 12, subsection 4. I took the paper from her and read it. It was indeed a section of the HOA bylaws, but it was clearly meant to allow HOA-approved contractors to access things like electrical boxes or water meters, not for residents to help themselves to each other's utilities. "This does not apply here," I said, handing the paper back. "This is about inspections, not about you taking my propane." "I am the HOA president," she said. "I have the authority to inspect any property in this neighborhood at any time." "Then schedule an inspection like a normal person," I said. "You do not get to just walk onto my property and take my stuff." Her face was turning red now, and I could tell she was getting angrier. "You are going to remove that lock, Blake, or I will fine you for being in violation of the HOA rules." "Go ahead and try," I said. "I will see you in court." I closed the door in her face, not wanting to continue the conversation. Through the window, I watched her stomp back to her car, and I knew this was far from over. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the HOA. It stated that I was in violation of the bylaws, and that I had 10 days to remove the lock from my propane tank or face a fine of $200 per day. The notice was signed by Brenda Whitmore in her capacity as HOA president. I immediately called my neighbor, Dennis Parker, who lived across the street. Dennis was a lawyer who specialized in real estate law, and he had dealt with his own share of HOA nonsense over the years. "Blake, this is ridiculous," Dennis said after I explained the situation. "That bylaw has nothing to do with securing your personal property. Brenda is just abusing her position because she is mad at you." "So what do?" I asked. "First, do not remove the lock," Dennis said. "Second, document everything. Take photos of the lock, save all the notices she sends you, and keep a record of every interaction. Third, I would recommend you attend the next HOA meeting and challenge this directly." "When is the next meeting?" I asked. "Next Tuesday at the community center," Dennis said. "I will go with you for moral support." The following Tuesday, Dennis and I walked into the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center at 7 in the evening. The meeting room was a bland space with fluorescent lighting and rows of folding chairs. About 15 residents were already seated, and Brenda was at the front table with 2 other board members, Gregory Mitchell, the treasurer, and Susan Hendricks, the secretary. Brenda's eyes locked onto me the moment I walked in, and I could see the displeasure on her face. Dennis and I took seats near the back, and the meeting started promptly at 7:15. Brenda droned on about various neighborhood issues. Someone had painted their mailbox the wrong shade of blue. Another resident had put up Christmas lights 2 days past the January 5th deadline for removal. It was all petty nonsense, but Brenda treated each violation like it was a federal crime. Finally, she got to my case. "We have an ongoing violation at 1247 Oakmont Drive," she announced, not even using my name. "The homeowner has installed an unauthorized locking mechanism on their propane tank, which is in direct violation of our bylaws." I raised my hand. "I would like to address that." Brenda looked annoyed. "There is nothing to address. You are in violation. Remove the lock, or continue to accrue fines." "Actually, there is quite a bit to address," I said, standing up. "The bylaw you are citing is meant for HOA-approved inspections and maintenance, not for personal access to private utilities. I installed the lock because you, Brenda, were caught attempting to take propane from my tank without permission." There were murmurs throughout the room. Several residents turned to look at Brenda with interest. "That is not what happened," Brenda said quickly. "I was simply inspecting the tank for safety violations." "With a wrench?" I asked. "You were trying to open the valve to take propane for your own heater. That is theft, Brenda." Gregory Mitchell cleared his throat. "Blake, do you have any proof of this?" "I have photos of the scratches on my valve where she tried to force it open," I said. "And I have a witness who saw her on my property that morning." This was a bit of a stretch. I did not actually have a witness, but I was betting Brenda would not call my bluff. Brenda's face was turning red again. "This is absurd. I would never steal from a neighbor." Dennis stood up next to me. "For the record, I am an attorney specializing in real estate law, and I have reviewed the HOA bylaws. There is no provision that requires homeowners to leave their utility systems unsecured. Blake has every right to protect his property." Susan Hendricks, the secretary, spoke up for the first time. "Brenda, is it true that you were on Blake's property without permission?" "I was conducting HOA business," Brenda insisted. "Did you notify him beforehand?" Susan asked. Brenda hesitated. "I did not think I needed to." "Actually, according to our own bylaws, the HOA must provide at least 48 hours notice before entering private property for any reason," Dennis interjected. "So even if this had been a legitimate inspection, it was done improperly." The room was buzzing now with conversation. I could see several residents nodding in agreement, and Brenda looked like she was losing control of the situation. "This discussion is over," Brenda said firmly. "The violation stands. Meeting adjourned." She banged her gavel before anyone could say anything else, and people started filing out of the room. Several neighbors came up to me afterward to express their support. Apparently, I was not the only one who had issues with Brenda's overreach. As Dennis and I walked back to our cars, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good in there. She knows she is on shaky ground now." "Do you think she will drop the fines?" I asked. "Maybe," Dennis said. "But people like Brenda do not like to lose. Be prepared for her to escalate." He was right. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a police car parked in front of my house. My heart sank as I pulled into my driveway. A uniformed officer was standing on my porch and Brenda was with him, talking animatedly. I got out of my car and approached them. "Officer, is there a problem?" The officer, whose name tag read Officer Martinez, turned to me. "Are you Blake Garrison?" "Yes, that is me." "I received a call from Miss Whitmore here claiming that you have been threatening her and that you have installed a hazardous device on your property." I looked at Brenda in disbelief. "That is completely false. I have not threatened anyone, and the only thing I installed is a lock on my propane tank." Brenda spoke up. "He has been harassing me ever since I asked to borrow some propane. He yelled at me and told me he would make my life miserable." "That is a lie," I said, my voice rising. "She came onto my property without permission and tried to steal from my propane tank. I installed a lock to protect my property, which is completely legal." Officer Martinez held up a hand. "All right, everyone calm down, Miss Whitmore, do you have any proof of these threats?" Brenda hesitated. "Well, no, but he said it right to my face." "And do you have any witnesses?" "No, but that does not mean it did not happen." Officer Martinez turned to me. "Mr. Garrison, can I see this lock you installed?" "Of course," I said. I led him around the side of the house to where my propane tank was located. The lock was clearly visible, a sturdy metal cage over the valve with a padlock securing it. Officer Martinez examined it for a moment. "This is a standard propane tank lock. There is nothing hazardous about it. People use these all the time to prevent theft." "But it is in violation of our HOA bylaws," Brenda protested. "Madam, HOA bylaws are a civil matter, not a criminal one," Officer Martinez said patiently. "If you have a dispute with Mr. Garrison about HOA rules, you need to handle it through the proper legal channels. But there is no crime being committed here." Brenda looked furious. "So you are not going to do anything?" "There is nothing to do," Officer Martinez said. "Mr. Garrison has the right to secure his property. If you continue to enter his property without permission, however, that could be considered trespassing." I could see Brenda's jaw clench. She turned on her heel and marched back to her car without another word. Officer Martinez watched her go, then turned back to me. "Sorry about that," he said. "We get calls like this sometimes. HOA disputes can get pretty heated." "I appreciate you coming out," I said. "I just want to be left alone." "I understand," Officer Martinez said. "If she continues to harass you, document everything and consider filing a restraining order if necessary." After he left, I went inside and poured myself a drink. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline. I could not believe Brenda had actually called the police on me over a propane tank lock. This was getting out of control. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. I continued to receive notices from the HOA about the fines accruing on my account, but I ignored them on Dennis's advice. He assured me that when this eventually went to court, no judge would uphold such an absurd fine. But then things took a darker turn. It was late February when I woke up one morning to find that my propane tank had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted the words "share or else" across the side of it in bright red paint. I immediately took photos and called the police. A different officer arrived this time, Officer Chen, and she took a report. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" she asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, and I explained the entire situation with Brenda and the HOA. Officer Chen took notes. "Do you have any security cameras?" "No, but I am going to install some today," I said. "That would be a good idea," she said. "Unfortunately, without video evidence or witnesses, there is not much we can do right now, but I will include all of this in my report." After she left, I drove to an electronics store and bought a complete home security system with cameras that covered my entire property, including the area around my propane tank. I spent the rest of the day installing them and setting up the monitoring app on my phone. 2 nights later, my vigilance paid off. At around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera covering my propane tank. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, and what I saw made my blood boil. Brenda was back at my propane tank, and this time she had brought tools. She was wearing dark clothing and had a headlamp on, and she was actively trying to cut through the lock with a bolt cutter. I immediately called the police. Then I grabbed my own flashlight and headed outside. I made sure to be loud, turning on all my exterior lights and shouting as I approached. "Brenda, what the hell are you doing?" She spun around, the bolt cutters falling from her hands. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then her expression hardened. "You have left me no choice," she said. "I have been freezing in my house because you refused to share your resources." "You had a choice," I said. "You could have called your propane company. You could have gotten a space heater. You could have done literally anything other than repeatedly try to steal from me." "This is not stealing," she insisted. "This is survival." "No, this is trespassing and attempted theft," I said. "And this time I have you on video." Her eyes widened. "Video," I pointed to the camera mounted under my eave. "Everything you just did is recorded. The police are on their way." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw genuine fear on Brenda's face. She bent down to pick up the bolt cutters, but I stepped forward. "Leave those," I said. "That is evidence." She straightened up, and I could see she was trying to think of a way out of this. "Blake, please. We can work this out. I will drop all the fines against you. We can forget this whole thing happened." "It is too late for that," I said. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived. Officer Martinez was one of the responding officers, and he recognized both of us immediately. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a sigh. "What are you doing here?" "I can explain," Brenda started, but Officer Martinez held up a hand. "Mr. Garrison, you said you have video?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage. It clearly showed Brenda approaching the propane tank with bolt cutters and attempting to cut through the lock. Officer Martinez watched it twice, then looked at Brenda. "Madam, I am going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." "What? You are arresting me?" Brenda's voice was shrill. "Yes, madam. You are being charged with attempted theft and criminal damage to property." As Officer Martinez handcuffed Brenda, she started crying. "Please, I am the HOA president. This will ruin my reputation. Blake, tell them it is a misunderstanding." I said nothing. I had given her multiple chances to stop, and she had chosen to escalate every single time. The other officer collected the bolt cutters as evidence and took additional photos of my propane tank and the damaged lock. Brenda was placed in the back of one of the police cars, still crying and protesting. Officer Martinez came over to me before they left. "You will need to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. Bring a copy of that video." "I will," I said. After the police left, I stood in my driveway for a long time, just processing what had happened. My quiet suburban life had turned into a nightmare because of one woman's entitlement and obsession with control. The next morning, news of Brenda's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My phone was ringing constantly with neighbors calling to ask if it was true. Dennis came over around noon with coffee and donuts. "I heard what happened," he said. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," I said. "Mostly just exhausted." "This is good, you know," Dennis said. "With criminal charges filed, the HOA is going to have to take this seriously. Brenda will probably be forced to resign." "I hope so," I said. "I just want this to be over." That afternoon, I went to the police station and gave my formal statement. I provided copies of all the video footage, as well as photos of the previous vandalism and documentation of every interaction I had had with Brenda. The detective handling the case, Detective Laura Simmons, was thorough and professional. "Mr. Garrison, I have to say, you did everything right here," she said after reviewing all the evidence. "You tried to resolve this peacefully, you documented everything, and you protected your property legally. Miss Whitmore is going to have a hard time defending her actions." "What happens next?" I asked. "She will be arraigned in a few days," Detective Simmons explained. "Given that this is her first offense, she will probably be released on bail. But with the video evidence, the The prosecution has a strong case. She will likely be offered a plea deal." "And what about the HOA stuff?" I asked. "That is separate," she said. "But I would recommend you contact an attorney about filing a civil suit for harassment and any damages you have incurred." I thanked her and left the station. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was relieved that the situation was finally being taken seriously, but I was also frustrated that it had come to this. All of this could have been avoided if Brenda had just accepted no for an answer. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Brenda was arraigned and released on a $5,000 bail. The story made the local news, and suddenly Meadowbrook Estates was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Several residents started calling for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss Brenda's position as president. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Dennis and I arrived early, and the community center was already packed. There had to be at least 50 residents there, which was probably the highest turnout for an HOA meeting in the neighborhood's history. Gregory Mitchell, the treasurer, called the meeting to order since Brenda was conspicuously absent. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know there has been a lot of controversy recently regarding our HOA president, and we want to address those concerns." A woman I recognized from a few streets over stood up. "Gregory, is it true that Brenda was arrested for trying to steal Blake's propane?" Gregory looked uncomfortable. "Yes, that is true. Brenda is currently facing criminal charges." The room erupted in conversation. Another resident, a man named Tom, stood up. "I move that we immediately remove Brenda Whitmore from her position as HOA president." "I second that," Dennis called out. Gregory looked at Susan, the secretary, who nodded. "All right, we will take a vote." All in favor of removing Brenda Whitmore as HOA president. Nearly every hand in the room went up. I did not even need to count to know it was unanimous. "The motion passes," Gregory announced. "Brenda Whitmore is hereby removed from her position. We will need to hold elections for a new president, but in the meantime, I will serve as interim president." Another resident stood up. "I also think we need to review the bylaws. This whole situation happened because Brenda was abusing her power. We need checks and balances to prevent this from happening again." There were murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Susan volunteered to head up a committee to review the bylaws and propose changes. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to apologize. Apparently, many of them had been too intimidated by Brenda to speak up about their own issues with her leadership. Now that she was gone, people were finally feeling free to share their stories. One man told me about how Brenda had fined him $1,000 because his grass was a quarter-inch too long. Another woman described how Brenda had tried to force her to cut down a tree in her backyard because she did not like how it looked. It was clear that I was not the only victim of Brenda's abuse of power. The difference was that I had finally stood up to her. In March, Brenda's criminal case went before a judge. Dennis accompanied me to the hearing for support. Brenda showed up with a lawyer, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who seemed to realize he had a losing case. The prosecutor presented the video evidence, and it was damning. There was no way to argue that Brenda had not been trying to cut through my lock. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been in a desperate situation due to the cold weather, but the judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Whitmore, you had numerous legal options available to you," Judge Patricia O'Neill said sternly. "You could have called your propane company, stayed with friends or family, checked into a hotel, or purchased space heaters. Instead, you chose to repeatedly trespass on Mr. Garrison's property and attempt to steal his propane. Furthermore, you abused your position as HOA president to try to force him to give you access to his property. Brenda's lawyer spoke up. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. We would ask for leniency." Judge O'Neill looked at the case file. "I see here that there was also vandalism to Mr. Garrison's property. Miss Whitmore, did you spray paint his propane tank?" Brenda hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. I was frustrated." "So in addition to attempted theft and criminal trespass, you also committed vandalism," the judge said. "Miss Whitmore, I am sentencing you to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, and you are to pay restitution to Mr. Garrison for all damages, including the cost of repairs, the security system he had to install, and any legal fees. You are also ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Garrison and his property at all times. You understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said quietly. As we left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was finally over. Brenda had been held accountable for her actions, and I could go back to living my life in peace. But there was still the matter of the HOA fines. Dennis had advised me to file a counterclaim against the HOA for harassment and abuse of power. With Brenda removed from her position and facing criminal charges, the new HOA board quickly agreed to drop all fines against me and issued a formal apology. In April, the neighborhood held elections for a new HOA president. A retired teacher named Margaret Foster won by a landslide. She immediately implemented new policies to make the HOA more transparent and accountable. Residents now had to vote on any fines over $100, and board members were required to give proper notice before entering anyone's property. As for Brenda, she put her house up for sale in May. I saw the moving truck outside her house one Saturday morning, and part of me felt a twinge of sadness. Despite everything she had put me through, I had never wanted to drive her out of the neighborhood. But I suppose the embarrassment and the criminal record had been too much for her to bear. A young couple with 2 kids moved into her house a few weeks later. They introduced themselves to me when I was mowing my lawn one afternoon, and they seemed nice and normal. When they asked me about the neighborhood, I told them it was quiet and peaceful. I did not mention anything about the drama with Brenda. That chapter was closed. Throughout the summer, life in Meadowbrook Estates returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. The pool was renovated, new playground equipment was installed at the park, and the monthly meetings became productive rather than adversarial. Dennis and I became good friends through the ordeal. We started having regular barbecues, and he introduced me to some of the other neighbors I had not gotten to know yet. It turned out that there was a great community in Meadowbrook Estates once you got past the tyranny of Brenda's leadership. In August, I received a check in the mail from Brenda for the restitution amount ordered by the court. It covered the cost of repairing my propane tank, the security system, and Dennis's legal fees for advising me. There was no note with it, just the check. I deposited it and considered the matter fully settled. One evening in September, I was sitting on my back deck with a beer, watching the sunset, when I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been 9 months since that first morning when I caught Brenda at my propane tank. 9 months of stress, conflict, police reports, and court appearances. But through it all, I had learned some valuable lessons. I learned that standing up for yourself is important, even when it is difficult. I could have just let Brenda take the propane that first day, or removed the lock when she demanded it. But giving in to unreasonable demands only encourages more unreasonable behavior. By standing firm and documenting everything, I had not only protected myself, but also freed the entire neighborhood from a tyrant. I also learned the importance of community. Dennis's support had been invaluable, and once other neighbors saw someone standing up to Brenda, they found their own courage to speak up about her abuses. Change rarely happens in isolation. It takes people working together. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. It would have been easier to just move away and let Brenda continue ruling the HOA with an iron fist. But by staying and fighting, I had made Meadowbrook Estates a better place for everyone. My propane tank still had the security lock on it, though I doubted I would ever need it again. I had kept it more as a reminder than anything else. A reminder that protecting what is yours is not selfish, it is necessary. A reminder that authority without accountability leads to abuse. And a reminder that even in the face of intimidation and harassment, standing up for what is right will ultimately prevail. The neighborhood Halloween party that October was the best one in years, according to the longtime residents. Margaret Foster, the new HOA president, organized it, and it was clear she understood what a community should be about. There were games for the kids, a chili cook-off for the adults, and a costume contest that everyone participated in. I went as a propane tank, which got a lot of laughs from people who knew the story. As I walked around the party, chatting with neighbors and enjoying the festive atmosphere, I realized how much had changed in less than a year. The community center that had once been the site of tense, hostile meetings was now filled with laughter and genuine neighborly warmth. Kids were running around playing tag while their parents socialized. Someone had set up a fire pit outside, and people were roasting marshmallows. Dennis came up to me with his wife, Rachel, whom I had gotten to know over the summer. "Nice costume," Rachel said with a grin. "I thought it was appropriate," I said. "You know, you are kind of a legend around here now," Dennis said. "The guy who stood up to Brenda and won." "I do not know about legend," I said. "I just did not want someone stealing my propane." "Well, you did more than that," Rachel said. "You changed this neighborhood for the better." Looking around at the happy faces and hearing the sounds of a real community coming together, I had to admit she might be right. Sometimes the most important battles are not the ones we choose, but the ones that choose us. And sometimes, standing your ground over something as simple as a propane tank can lead to positive change for an entire community. As winter approached again, I made sure my propane tank was filled early. The company came out in November, and I watched as they topped off my tank. The driver noticed the security lock and chuckled. "Got a theft problem?" he asked. "Had one," I said. "Not anymore," he nodded knowingly. "Yeah, you would be surprised how often people try to steal propane. Good thinking with the lock." After he left, I walked over to inspect the tank. The spray paint had been professionally removed, and you could not even tell it had been vandalized. The lock was still sturdy and secure. Everything was as it should be. That evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, I sat in my warm living room with my heater running perfectly. My propane tank was full, my home was secure, and I was surrounded by good neighbors. It had been a long and difficult journey to get to this point, but it had been worth it. I thought about Brenda occasionally, wondering how she was doing wherever she had moved to. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, though I had my doubts. Some people are so committed to their way of thinking that even consequences cannot change them. But that was not my problem anymore. The HOA sent out its end-of-year newsletter in December, and it was night and day compared to the newsletters from Brenda's tenure. Instead of being filled with violations and threats of fines, it highlighted neighborhood achievements and thanked volunteers who had contributed to various projects. There was a whole section about the updated bylaws and how they would ensure fair and transparent governance going forward, Margaret Foster had included a message from the board that resonated with me. It read, "A homeowners association should serve the community, not rule it. Our job is to maintain property values and ensure a pleasant living environment, but never at the expense of our neighbors' rights and dignity. We are all in this together, and we are committed to making Meadowbrook Estates a place where everyone feels respected and valued." It was such a stark contrast to Brenda's leadership style, which had been all about control and compliance. Margaret understood what Brenda never did, that a community works best when people are treated with respect and given the freedom to live their lives without constant interference. On New Year's Eve, Dennis and Rachel invited me over for a small party. A few other neighbors were there, and at midnight we all toasted to the new year. As we counted down from 10, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future for the first time in a long while. "To new beginnings," Dennis said as we raised our glasses. "To standing up for what is right," Rachel added. "To good neighbors and full propane tanks," I said, which got a round of laughter. We clinked our glasses together, and as the clock struck midnight, fireworks started going off in the distance. Through the window, I could see them lighting up the sky over Naperville, bright bursts of color against the dark winter night. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the situation with Brenda had taught me more than just how to deal with a difficult HOA president. It had taught me about resilience, about the importance of documentation and evidence, about the value of having good people in your corner, and about the fact that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to fight for it. It had also taught me about the dangers of unchecked authority. Brenda had started as HOA president probably with good intentions, wanting to maintain the neighborhood and protect property values. But somewhere along the way, the power had gone to her head. She had started seeing residents as subjects rather than neighbors, and any resistance to her authority was taken as a personal insult. The criminal charges and her removal from the HOA had been necessary consequences of her actions. You cannot trespass on someone's property repeatedly, attempt to steal their utilities, vandalize their belongings, and abuse your position of authority without facing repercussions. The justice system had worked the way it was supposed to, and Brenda had been held accountable. But beyond the personal victory, the real win was what had happened to the community. The neighborhood had come together in a way it never had before. People who had been silently suffering under Brenda's tyrannical leadership had found their voices. The HOA had been reformed with better checks and balances. And Meadowbrook Estates had transformed from a place ruled by fear and petty regulations into an actual community. In January, just over a year after this whole ordeal began, I was outside shoveling snow from my driveway when the new neighbors from Brenda's old house came over. The husband, whose name was Kevin, helped me finish shoveling. "Thanks," I said when we were done. "I appreciate it." "No problem," Kevin said. "That is what neighbors do, right?" His wife, Amanda, came out with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "We wanted to thank you," she said, handing me one of the mugs. "Thank me for what?" I asked. "When we were looking at houses, we almost did not buy here because of some of the reviews we read online about the HOA," Kevin explained. "But then we found articles about what happened with the old president and how the neighborhood came together to fix things. That actually made us want to live here more. We wanted to live in a community where people stand up for what is right," Amanda added, "and where neighbors look out for each other." Their words hit me harder than I expected. I had never thought about how my situation with Brenda might affect people beyond just our neighborhood. But of course, it had been in the news and online. And apparently, It had sent a message that Meadowbrook Estates was a place where justice and fairness mattered. "Well, I am glad you are here," I said sincerely. "You seem like great neighbors." "We try to be," Kevin said with a smile. "And if you ever need to borrow some propane, just let us know." We all laughed at that, and I realized that even the painful memories were starting to become something we could laugh about. That is how you know you have truly moved past something, when it becomes a story you can tell rather than a wound that still hurts. As winter turned to spring, life continued peacefully in Meadowbrook Estates. The HOA functioned smoothly under Margaret's leadership. The neighborhood looked better than ever, with people taking pride in their homes and the common areas. And most importantly, people were happy. I never saw or heard from Brenda again after she moved away. Her probation was set to end in March according to the court records, and I assumed she would complete her community service and move on with her life somewhere else. Part of me hoped she had learned from the experience and would never abuse a position of authority again. But another part of me suspected that she probably just blamed everyone else for what had happened and had not taken any personal responsibility. Either way, it did not matter anymore. She was gone, and the neighborhood was better for it. Sometimes the best resolution to a conflict is simply removing yourself from the toxic person's orbit, and in this case, she had done that for us by moving away. My propane tank continued to serve me well, providing heat through the cold months and hot water year-round. The security lock remained in place, not because I thought anyone would try to steal from it again, but because it had become a symbol. A symbol of standing your ground, of protecting what is yours, and of not letting anyone bully you into submission. On warm summer evenings, I would sit on my back deck and watch the sunset, often with Dennis and Rachel or other neighbors. We would talk about work, sports, movies, and all the normal things that neighbors talk about. The drama with Brenda felt like a distant memory, something from another lifetime, but I never forgot the lessons I learned. I kept all the documentation from the incident in a file in my home office, not because I thought I would need it again, but as a reminder. A reminder to always stand up for yourself. A reminder to document everything when dealing with difficult people. A reminder that the justice system, while imperfect, can work when you follow the proper procedures. And a reminder that sometimes the hardest path is also the right path. The Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association continued to thrive under new leadership. Margaret Foster served 2 terms as president before passing the torch to another capable neighbor. The bylaws that were reformed after Brenda's removal remained in place, ensuring that no future HOA president could abuse their authority the way she had. And my propane tank, secure behind its lock, continued to fuel my home through countless winters, a silent testament to the importance of protecting what is yours and standing firm in the face of unreasonable demands. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that cold January morning when I first saw Brenda with that wrench, and I smiled knowing that I had made the right choice every step of the way. The neighborhood children would sometimes ask their parents about the propane tank story, and it became something of a local legend. Parents would tell their kids about how important it is to stand up to bullies and to protect your property and your rights. In a strange way, my conflict with Brenda had become a teaching moment for the entire community. Years later, when new families moved into the neighborhood, longtime residents would tell them about how Meadowbrook Estates had once been ruled by a tyrannical HOA president, and how one homeowner's refusal to be pushed around had changed everything. The story would be embellished slightly with each telling, as stories often are, but the core message remained the same. Stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. As for me, I continued to live peacefully in my home, my propane tank securely locked, my property protected, and my dignity intact. I had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can lead to the biggest changes. All I had wanted was to protect my propane tank. What I ended up doing was freeing an entire neighborhood from tyranny. And that, more than any legal victory or compensation, was the greatest reward of all. Knowing that I had made a difference, that I had stood up when it mattered, and that my community was better because I had refused to back down. The locked propane tank was not just protecting my fuel, it was protecting a principle. And principles, I had learned, are always worth fighting for.